Well, good evening. This is not Q&A. I'm Dave Pellowe, and we are broadcast on the Good Source platform. The website is goodsource.news. And joining me tonight, all the way from fair south of the border, is Alexandra Marshall. Ellie, welcome to Not Q&A. We've had our school holidays break, and we're back. How are you?
I appear to have accidentally Skyped into some kind of stag night with you boys all on the desk, preening each other and getting ready. It's wonderful to be back here today.
It is a little bit of a party zone, pretty relaxed and casual here on the set. So if we look less than professional tonight, please forgive us. You're in your new office, new home after being washed out, flooded and thoroughly soaked?
That's correct. I am back in Sydney and in a new little spot. It's still a bit sparse, so I've pretty much got what you see on camera frame set up, and that's it. But it's great to be down here, and I think we've got a little bit more freedom than you guys up in Queensland, so it's a good day.
I don't know that I'm noticing any lack of freedom here in Queensland. Let me introduce the other gentleman on the set tonight. My special guest tonight is Andrew Cooper. Andrew, thank you very much for coming in.
Thanks, David. And
also Damian Coory.
Not so special.
Not so special, run-of-the-mill pedestrian all the time. So, yeah, and tonight we're going to be talking about a number of things, but the most important thing that we want to start with is the case where the High Court case that you're dealing with Andrew, and essentially after the first CPAC, or before the first CPAC, you were sent letters basically asking to show all of the private correspondence that you'd had as the organiser of this Conservative political action conference.
Yeah.
Tell the story in full.
Well, I mean, what we now know with the full benefit of all the disclosures that the court case has brought out, and also freedom of information requests, mainly initiated by the Institute of Public Affairs. We now know that prior to CPAC, the Shadow Attorney General, Dreyfus, met with bureaucrats within the Attorney General's department, unbeknown to the actual Attorney General, Christian Porter. He instructed or fed the bureaucrats within the Attorney General's department information about CPAC, indicated that they should be pursuing CPAC using new legislation brought in by Conservative government the previous year. And they used that Foreign Influence Transparency Scheme Act to demand all communications, emails, conversations, meetings, with every attendee at the conference, with every speaker at the conference, and also with the American Conservative Union, which we invited over to co-host the event in Australia.
Wow.
Yeah,
it's
wow.
Pretty embarrassing. What did you do initially when you saw that, and how did you respond?
Well, I received it at the same time as Tony Abbott received his.
Right.
And Tony was a speaker at the conference, and I did what Tony did. I just ignored it. I just thought it was, in fact, I thought it was spam the first time I saw it. I was in the middle of organising a conference, but about a few weeks after the conference, they sent me a follow-up email that said that I have 14 days to provide this material. And it's an enormous, I worked out it was thousands and thousands of pages of material. They gave me 14 days, or I'll be referred, if I fail to provide it, I'll be referred to the federal police, subject to arrest and 6 months jail.
Right. Okay. Well, that's respectful of free speech.
Yeah. So, so as you may imagine, I was a little concerned by that. So
yeah.
I elected to get some legal advice, and we could have challenged it to get myself off. But the more I looked at this piece of legislation, the more I realised that this can be weaponised by bureaucrats to shut down any conference that had a foreign speaker at it. Technically, this legislation could be used to shut it down. Now, the thing is that the legislation was brought in to combat what was perceived to be foreign influence by bad Chinese actors in the Australian political system. The legislation had been live for a year. I was the first person to receive this notice, right? So
never used for the intent for which it was originally introduced.
I was the first recipient of this draconian piece. So others had registered on it, but I was the first one to be threatened with jail. And so anyway, we ended up taking that to the High Court, and that was well over a 12-month process, expensive process, and we got some funding from some generous backers.
So just to be clear, mate, you were taking it to the High Court in order to take the issue further, right? You at your own expense, not just to defend yourself.
Yeah. So it wasn't, in the end, it wasn't about me, because, you know, at the end of the day, this is very fundamentally a free speech issue.
Yeah.
If the Shadow Attorney General can go in and background some bureaucrats and basically sick them onto people that they don't like, if this legislation can be used like that, then we've got a fundamental problem here in Australia. So we've gone to the High Court to try and invalidate at least aspects of that legislation that allowed them to chase conference holders. So that court case was held 6 weeks ago, and it was run on the basis of it being a free speech issue, and traditionally or historically, free speech matters don't win, but certainly my barristers and lawyers are confident. So
what's the outcome that you're hoping for? Is it a complete strike down, or a reinterpretation of the law that says this only applies to, you know, how does this potentially work for you?
So we've gone in there arguing that it needs to be entirely rewritten and struck out. What is possible, though, is that the 7 High Court judges may determine that there are aspects of the legislation that need rewriting, or that, in fact, whole sections can be removed. So it's entirely up to the judges. They need to form an agreement on that. So it's tricky, right? It's a tricky thing.
Have you got any specifics that you can recite or describe?
Not really, but the interesting thing is, not only can, if I'm forced to register on this, not only are you then subject to fairly lengthy and draconian reporting requirements into this body, but your details can be passed on to 21 separate federal bodies, including the tax department, including every security agency in the country, including ASIC. They basically, any material, any information they find within this material that you hand over, they can then forward that to any security agency. Technically, I can then be put on, I can be surveilled by security agencies without, It's incredible.
And all because you're conservative and organised a conservative.
I organised a conference, right, with some Americans.
Invited some Americans.
Exactly.
Because America is the great threat to Australia's democracy.
Well, I was in this crazy situation, David, where I was asked. So one of our guests was Mark Meadows, Nigel Farage, who was the leader of the Brexit Party, fighting the Brexit issue at the time, and Mark Meadows, who was the Republican congressman and leader of the Freedom Caucus in America. I was asked to hand over to our bureaucrats confidential information and confidential emails I've had with them. It's just absurd. Like, you know, they are our greatest security allies, and they're asking me to hand over private conversation, which is probably breaking some of their laws. Right. Right.
So well, that's the other thing when you get into these international things, right? You find yourself in a double bind where you're caught between the jurisdictions of, you know, the requirements of one bunch of crazy bureaucrats and then the requirements of another bunch of crazy bureaucrats.
In the end, I wrote back to them and said, I will not and cannot comply with your instructions. And you know, I had, you know, Tony Abbott was the speaker. There's lots of people who are speakers. They, as soon as I make the decision to hand over that information, what speaker would ever go to come to one of my conferences again?
Right.
And this is the chilling impact of this legislation on free speech.
I actually love what Tony Abbott said to in his reply. I remember that being published, and I only remember the one word out of the whole reply, but he basically told them that they were impertinent. Like, how dare you talk to a former Prime Minister as if he's a threat to the security of the nation? Like, grow up.
Well, that's how it should be dealt with. Sorry, I missed the very start of the explanation, but who were the bureaucrats that drove this?
There are bureaucrats, so it's a division within the Attorney General's Department, called the Foreign Influence Transparency Scheme.
So they're charged with implementing that legislation.
Yeah, so they've sat on that for a year.
Right, and they haven't done anything in relation to China.
No. I was
Right, and you were the first.
Yeah.
So we're getting value for our money from the tax money.
The kingpin of foreign influence in Australia.
Oh, yes. Got to get that CPAC.
But Tony Abbott signed off on this legislation.
Well, yeah.
Nothing wrong with the legislation. It's
not
the bureaucrats,
intent,
right?
Anyway. Yeah. Obviously.
Well, there is something wrong with it.
Yeah, I think my view is if the legislation can be misused beyond the intent of the legislation, then there's a fundamental flaw within the legislation, and it needs to be.
Yes,
they need to scrap it and start again. Hence the High Court case.
So it probably needs to say something like, allied nations excluded, or it has to be a threat nation or something like that. Yeah.
I'm not sure they can.
Not sure
be
they can do that.
No, but certainly they can water it down. And my barristers are given indications of what sections are most problematic.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
you said that Christian Porter, the Attorney General, didn't know anything about it.
So he didn't know anything about the meeting that Dreyfus had. He didn't know anything about
Dreyfus is the
Shadow Attorney General.
Oh,
Labour
sorry.
Party's,
I'm sorry.
He didn't know about that. He didn't know about the letters that I had received from his own department.
Right.
And he was only alerted to those letters when Janet Albertson from the Australian newspaper rang him. And he was quite surprised, apparently, that that we were being pursued. But what was also surprising to me is that Christian Porter immediately said that there was nothing wrong with the legislation, even though it had basically been misused by his own department. So it's a very curious thing to me, the politics behind this legislation, why it was brought in, and clearly it's not being used the way that it was originally intended. But like any legislation, once it's made into law, it's very difficult to weed out. Yeah.
Ellie, have you got any thoughts on this legislation, what we've been discussing? Let's bring you back in.
Well, look, there's been a lot of dodgy legislation written recently, much of it by Christian Porter, I'm sorry to say. And the main problem with the Foreign Interference Bill is, of course, that it lacks intent. So it was marketed as a bill specifically to combat the infiltration of the Chinese Communist Party in Australian operations. And, of course, the bill itself doesn't actually specifically say that. And so because the bill doesn't specify what it's trying to do, it can be used as a weapon by the bureaucracy and particularly by the bureaucrats on the left to attack conservatives and their allies, which is exactly what's happened here. And I'm not as generous to Christian Porter as Andrew Cooper is, because as far as I'm concerned, he had enough time to work out what was going on and to pull it up before it got as far as it did. And it's his department, it's his legislation, and it's clearly a failed idea and a failed concept, and a dangerous concept to be left in law, and should be, as Cooper says, scrapped and start again.
Yeah. Absolutely. Now, Andrew, you are not only the founder of CPAC in Australia, but for a lot longer than that, you've been the founder and director of LibertyWorks. And it's essentially LibertyWorks that is driving this battle, isn't it? Yeah,
so LibertyWorks was the host of that particular conference. And so LibertyWorks was the complainant that took the Commonwealth to the High Court.
Brilliant. Yep. And how can people get on board with that case right now? Is there petitions they can sign? I mean, I guess it's with the High Court, but
yep. So the case was we've had our day in court. That was 6 weeks ago, and now we're waiting for the judges to deliberate and bring down their judgment. That can take many months. In some cases, the High Court has deliberated for 18 months. So there's not much you can do at this point to...
and what's the worst case outcome for you if they don't rule in your favour and they say...
first of all, we'll get a cost order against us, which will be difficult to contemplate, really. But then also I'll be required to register as potentially a foreign actor in Australian politics. And any email or communications that I have in relation to these events will have to be potentially packaged up and sent to the Attorney Generals. And you know, what I will do is I'll just CC every piece of communication I have with anyone off to the Attorney General's department, because what can I do? And it just seems just very draconian. I know what they're trying to do with this legislation. I sympathise. I mean, I am no friend of of China. I've been to Hong Kong and stood in front of tear gas canister armed, China-backed police in the rain with student protesters. I am no fan of them, but this is the wrong way to do it.
Yeah.
Well, exactly, Andrew. And what they should have said is this legislation is meant to combat specifically China's influence, and yet it doesn't say China because they don't want to upset Xi Jinping. And all it's done is not solve the problem that they were trying to face and embroil you in something you shouldn't even be embroiled in.
So, were they surprised when you sort of turned the tables on them and said, "No, I'm taking you to court"? Or
I think they were surprised in the sense that they sent me a letter then saying that they were no longer pursuing me on this particular matter.
Oh.
They did say in that letter that they will, though, they reserve their right to, and they said that my statements in the media amounted to full disclosure and that they no longer needed the material. I mean, it's nonsense, right? It's just nonsense. But so that my statements in the media had amounted to full disclosure. They no longer considered me for this event a foreign actor trying to influence the.
You don't sound too American, I've got to say. Influence
the political system. Well, the way the legislation is worded is that I'm acting on behalf of Nigel Farage or
CPAC America.
CPAC America,
yeah.
And they could have just bought tickets to the show if they wanted full disclosure. They could have come and seen your show.
Exactly, Ali. Absolutely, exactly. They could have done that.
Might have learned a thing or two
by the recordings.
The legislation catches.
You don't get it for free, but it'll cost you $50.
That's right. But the legislation is so wide, it just catches everyone.
Yeah. McDonald's better be careful then.
Well,
as American burgers could be sent to attack us.
From my point of view, we're not doing this to stop it from this legislation from attacking conservative speakers. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, if the Greens Party or the Climate Change Coalition or whatever want to bring out speakers to, they should be free to do that as well. Yeah. That's what we need to protect free speech in this country. Open discourse was something that we took for granted, but death by 1,000 cuts is gradually being whittled away. Now, I've personally suffered the consequences of some of this legislation, but there's just more and more of it out there, and there's more and more of it being proposed, and we've just got to be very careful what we're doing.
And surely a conference isn't the kind of activity that this legislation should be targeting, even if we say it's okay for China to spruik their ideas here so that we can engage and combat them front on publicly. A conference is exactly the format we want them to present it in. It's the subterfuge, the secret stuff.
It's the $100,000 in a brown paper bag.
Exactly.
That's what we're trying to stop.
Exactly.
Yeah, not a bunch of people getting up on a stage and speaking openly and freely to the community
about their ideas. Yeah, very, very.
Well, let's not forget, Dave, that the legislation actually specifically protects the type of foreign actors who are most likely to engage in the problem. So it protects members of the China. Yeah, it protects members of the Chinese Communist Party and people who are acting as official items of the foreign state. So it doesn't even work as a concept. That's what I found most interesting about the legislation when you go in and read the detail.
Okay, great. It sounds like you're more familiar with it than I am. What have you got any suggestions on how you, if you were on the High Court, would amend it?
Well, I just throw it out the start because obviously a failed piece of legislation that shouldn't exist, I just throw it back to the government saying this is crap, try again. Okay. But if the government are worried about foreign actors, why don't they investigate them properly instead of trying to put through these half-assed legislation when what they really want to do is actually investigate with ASIO the problem of foreign interference. But they don't want to do that because that will upset China specifically.
Yep. Yeah, definitely fair enough. Now, this isn't the only legal battle you're tackling at the moment with Liberty Works.
Yeah.
You're also in the federal court trying to obtain for Australians permission, as in the existing freedom denied by government, to leave the country whenever we want. Talk about the injustice that you've seen and what steps you're taking to remedy that through legal action.
Yeah, David. Yeah, so it seems like that we're just a constant thorn in the side of the Conservative government, but we have taken the government to the federal court to protect or to re-establish the right of Australians to leave the country. And we've done that because there are literally tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of Australians that would like to go and visit loved ones in other countries. Some have important business to attend to. But mainly the thing that motivated us was that there's literally, you know, as I said, tens, perhaps hundreds of thousands of people that want to leave the country. And the restriction, some Australians don't even realise that they're not allowed, you're not allowed to leave the country. But it's just an absurd thing. The restriction has been brought in under the Emergency Health Act. But there's nothing.
You know what? You're right. If I thought I wanted to travel to America, my initial thought would be America wouldn't let me enter. It wouldn't be the thought that even if America let me enter, Australia wouldn't let me go. That seems ridiculous.
You can't go. They brought it in. They've cited the Emergency Health Act as the mechanism by which they brought in this crazy law. But there's no logic behind someone leaving the country, somehow leaving, and then that action making Australia less safe.
They don't want to have to worry about you when you come back. That's the problem. Well, I think that's just, I mean, this is one where I draw the line on an ethical basis. And, you know, it's not appropriate for any government to prohibit the free movement of its citizens out or in their own country. I mean, that is a principle of totalitarian, authoritarian government. It's not okay for that to be happening in any way, shape or form in Australia. Now, you can require people with reason to
sick or
quarantine. You can require them to do tests when they come back. You can, I don't think it's correct, but you could ask people to, as we are doing, to pay for it themselves. But I think it's an absolute abomination to our fundamental freedoms. And when you tell people from other free Western developed countries this, they're just aghast. Mm-hmm. And then they can't believe it, especially when you tell them how little COVID we've got going on. And even if you say, well, the reason we've got very little COVID is because of our isolation, they still say, but, you know, you could isolate people coming back. I mean, it's just as a fundamental matter of principle and freedom, and it really disturbs me, and it speaks to where I think Australia's gone in the time that I've been away. You know, I've just come back after 20 years abroad as an expat. The way this country's gone in the last 20 years, there's this creeping, boiling frog effect, right? And I guess returning expats can sort of see it because we've been away for a while, and I can see the change. But the fact that I'm dumbfounded by the fact that everyone's comfortable to just accept this. It fascinates me. It's like people just going, oh, yeah, that's all right. Yeah, we don't want any of that nonsense going on. People traveling overseas. Yeah. Got relatives overseas I need to see.
And the problem, I think, we rely on the Liberal Party, the Conservatives, to protect individual freedoms. And we know that their intent, again, it's good intentions, right? Their intent is to try and keep, in their view, keep Australians safe.
God help us from government's good intentions.
Good intentions.
Yes.
But in this instance and many other instances, they've really just sacrificed people that are suffering. And we're not talking about dozens, we're talking about tens of thousands. Like there's Facebook groups where there's 100,000 people on there, all talking about how they can get overseas. Their stories are,
and there's 100,000 more Australians trying to come home. And one of the things living over there, living abroad, you know, I used to always say, the day that living in Hong Kong, the day that I feel like I can't just get on a plane and go and get home to Australia, is the day that I'm out of here, right? And having that passport, that Australian passport, and being able to think, okay, I can always get back to a free nation and have free movement, is a very, very powerful and important thing. We've effectively turned Australians abroad into kind of stateless refugees. I mean, they can't get home.
Wow. We should be careful there. There's two levels. The state governments put caps on, so they're the ones that are stopping people coming in. But there is a constitutional mechanism for anyone is allowed to return home to Australia. The state governments have these caps, right? So there's this tug of war going on between the federal government. Our action is just purely in relation to leaving the country,
right?
Which in no way hurts anyone. You know, if you leave the country again, it doesn't impact anyone.
But again, Andrew, practically it's impossible to get home. I mean, you know, in practical terms, you've got to pay an airfare, you've got to pay business class.
So we will say, and part of our submission to the federal court is that these people who want to leave, they leave fully understanding that they may not be able to get back.
Yes.
Okay, but that's on them. That's their choice. And I'll tell you, there are hundreds of thousands of Australians that will still want to do it. Some have got fiancés in other countries. Some have got loved ones. They've got funerals to attend to. They've got parents that are dying. They've got, it's heartbreaking when you get into some of these stories. And we need to change this.
Someone once said to me, it's just Cuba, North Korea, and Australia. I'm not sure if that's true, but they're the 3 countries on earth now that you can't leave without government permission.
Facebook will fact check that.
Facebook, please fact check that.
Yeah,
for us
there's no other Western country that prevents its own citizens from leaving the country.
Well, that's it. Hey, what's the progress on that? Have you just launched the action? Is it being heard?
So we're in the federal court on the 6th of May.
Okay.
We requested a full bench of the federal court because it was just before one judge. The government could appeal if we win. If we get the full bench, we'd expect an adjudication within a couple of weeks. If it comes down in our favour, borders are open.
Wow. Borders
are open, right? And those people, I encourage every one of them to take the opportunity to get on whatever plane they can and go see their loved ones as quickly as they can before the government comes up with another plan.
Right. And what are the prospects of prevailing in this case?
They're pretty happy with the High Court matter, but they're very confident on this one.
Oh.
And it's a very simple piece of legislation. It's not a complicated piece of legislation. I'm not sure whether you've read this one, Ali, but it's just very clear, concise language. It's Emergency Health Act, and nothing in that act allows the government to trigger this, this policy that they have.
Brilliant.
Well, the Health Act is, of course, an evolution of the old Quarantine Act, which I think a lot of people tend to forget. It is a federal act, not a state act. And so there are 2 things you have to remember here. One is that it is absolutely, at the end of the day, the federal government's responsibility about what the measures that are brought in and what goes on there. And that it was all of our state governments and federal governments who closed all of our old quarantine stations and decided through, I think it was 10 years, it might be 15 years ago, they had all these studies and reports going, well, in a globalized world, we simply can't maintain or keep quarantine stations, so they closed the last of them down. So they're now complaining they have no way of controlling the transit in and out of the country during an infectious disease. Well, they have only themselves to blame, and they don't want anyone to go and realize that is the case, and it's their own conscious decision to do so against the advice of the report. And the other thing is the Quarantine Act, from which they're actually dividing the Health Act, did not have any provisions in it to control the movement or behaviours of healthy individuals. It was purely to quarantine and control those who were already sick. And so this idea now that they can mandate the closure of entire states and countries of healthy people is crazy and well beyond what was ever envisioned by the people who wrote the original acts. And I mean, even the act itself was not supposed to be triggered unless there was a certain death rate, which was well above 5%, and COVID doesn't even come close to triggering what should have been the terms of the act to begin with.
And when was that act made? Was that Spanish flu time?
Yes, so don't quote me on the exact date, but it was in about 3 or so years, the Spanish flu, and then it went through about 4 or 5 revisions until finally becoming the Health Act. And it was reviewed several times by the states and the federal government after the second pandemic about whether or not states and the federal government should maintain control during infectious diseases. And it was decided by everybody that the federal government had to have absolute control over all health provisions to do with infectious diseases and outbreaks. So that's why the National Cabinet exists, because Scott Morrison did not want to take all the blame from the press for decisions being made. So instead, state premiers were invited to assist in the decisions, mostly for political security.
Interesting. Well, you got any further thoughts on that? Or
well, that I do, because that's an abdication of leadership, and we've seen abdications of leadership occurring within states where you have the premiers abdicating leadership to their chief health officer bureaucrats.
Right.
It's the role of a leader in a crisis situation to seek counsel from all of their advisors, and they are supposed to take, you know, as a leader, whether you're running a corporation or a government, you're supposed to act as the person who aggregates all of that advice and makes decisions by weighting that advice appropriately. Now, you would certainly, in a pandemic crisis, you're going to weight the chief health officer's advice very heavily. but you've also got to take counsel from, you know, your economic advisors. You've got to take counsel from
clinicians,
people, exactly,
psychologists,
people out there who are dealing with people day to day who are
Mm.
suffering from the effects of the policies that you're putting in, like lockdowns and things like that.
And also the ethical nature of the Constitution. Like, there are some things we can say, or we can save people, but is it even the government's right to do what they are doing? Is this bigger question of civilization what we agreed and entered into with our entire system of government, and where the boundaries lie on what they can and can't do?
Yeah. And so if you just say, I'm going to follow the chief health officer or the chief medical officer and do whatever she tells me to do or he tells me to do, you are effectively being an appalling leader.
Yeah.
And you're handing over the running of a crisis to an unelected bureaucrat, which I personally have an enormous problem with. And you're also, you know, not fulfilling your role to balance multiple pieces of advice.
And isn't this exactly what our state leader, we were all in Queensland, you know, Deb Frecklington, should have said?
Anastasia Palaszczuk, you mean?
No, I mean Deb Frecklington, the state leader of the opposition.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Before the election, instead of just going, oh, I'll do whatever Anna said, and that is whatever the CMO said, she should have said, well, look, there are other experts. Let's balance it all. Let's not abdicate leadership to somebody else, a mid-level bureaucrat, but let's take the advice from the competent experts, weighing it appropriately, and then making the leadership decisions in consideration of the full balance of policy necessities as elected to do.
You should be writing the messaging for the Liberal National Party in Queensland, David, with that approach. Yes, that's what you should do.
I agree. If you would like to win the next LNP Queensland state election, just contact the Good Source. We will write your messaging for you.
This is a wider symptom of conservative politics, I'm afraid, and in our entire Western civilization. We were warned by the people, the intellectuals writing in Europe last century, that when bureaucracy outgrows politics, you end up with states run by effectively collectivist systems, and the bureaucracy is what kills liberty and freedom. And we are seeing it front and center with the health crisis, where we've allowed the bureaucracy to stampede over politics and basically the will of the people itself. And there's no better example than Queensland, where you guys live, where you've got basically no opposition at all.
I don't know, WA is looking pretty good on the no opposition score at the moment, I got to say.
We've at least got warm chairs. In WA, their chairs are cold.
We've got seat warmers here, lots of them.
Andrew, where can people get in touch with Liberty Works to support the work that you're doing, whether it's petitions or newsletters, just to stay informed and keep the fuel in the tank?
The best way is the website, libertyworks.org.au, or attend a CPAC conference. The next one will be on
Liberty Works, WORKS.
That's it. .org.au. And we'll be launching a fundraiser, not a big one, but a small one to cover some
big donations. Welcome.
Yeah, big donations are welcome, but we have some expenses related to this federal court case that have run over, mainly because the government's fighting hard.
Fighting hard to lock you here in the
country. To keep you locked down, So we will be launching a fundraiser. So if there's anyone out there that wants to make a contribution, that'll be greatly appreciated.
Tax deductible, is it?
No, that won't be tax deductible, unfortunately. But that'll be launched out with
throw that in.
Facts, yeah.
It always helps.
No matter how it is to get a tax deductible donation.
How surprising that the bureaucrats won't allow that to be tax deductible.
And coming to CPAC.
Yeah, so CPAC's on the 9th of October. That'll be in Sydney, about 1,000 people we expect. So that'll be fun.
Yep, can't wait to go. Went to the first one, missed the second one thanks to lockdown and so many other things. How many people did you end up? You could only have New South Welshmen in there.
In the end, we could only have New South Welshmen, and they capped us at 300 people, so we had to cancel 650 tickets. So that was a big
What's the
blow.
venue?
The International Convention Centre.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I can't wait.
It will be awesome.
Just on what Ali was talking about before, the general principle here, and I know this is probably something that's fairly dear to your heart. Just what is your sense of where we're at in terms of, I always think that if there's no force against government just expands itself continually, right? And you have to have some kind of force in Australia or in any democratic country, pushing against the endless expansion of government. And you inevitably wind up with liberal parties of libertarian or liberal or conservative leaning becoming part of the system, of course, because they like power too once they've got it, and then wanting to expand their power, and so continuing to expand their bureaucracy. And so how do you, is there anything you've read in all of your wisdom and knowledge and experience in this sort of area of political thinking? Is there a counter to that that's ever successfully
shrunk government?
Like a mechanism to shrink government, yeah.
If you look historically around all the nations in the world, basically government just creepingly gets bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
And what we need, and the only thing we can come up with, is a political system that hopefully, you know, evolves into two parties: those that believe that the creeping should increase a little bit, and those that believe that creeping should be slowed or maybe crimped back a little bit. What I fear right now at the moment, on the back of this virus, the political side that we rely on to keep that growth in government contained has well, basically embraced the other side. I mean, debt now, you know, borrowing is out of control. The average
because you can't win if you don't. I mean, the average person out there is going, I want, gimme, 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 right? So the government just said, well, we'll give you. And then if you stand up against that, like a Campbell Newman or someone like that who comes in and says, well, you know, we're going to shrink the size of government, then the machine just clicks in, the unions, the bureaucrats, and they work against you, the media, everybody. Next thing, you're out the door. So everyone in the party thinks, well, we might as well.
So you're quite right. I think the average person is actually happy with what the government's doing at the moment. So my question is, why is the average person happy with what's going on at the moment? And that's the fundamental question. The question isn't, why isn't the government selling a different message? Because you know what? People don't want to hear that other message at the moment. The question is, why aren't Australians receptive to old messages that we used to have, to fundamental principles that we used to hold dear about balanced budgets and keeping welfare under control, and those things are just being ripped up
because
by both sides.
We haven't educated. You know, maybe we never did. I don't know, but it seems it's got to start with education. People got to understand economics before they're going to appreciate liberalism as a thing.
Ellie, are you trying to jump in here?
I was going to say, Ellie's the historian.
I think Damian asked a slightly deeper question, and I wrote about this in The Spectator last year. And that is, governments, when they become under pressure, they either dissolve or reform themselves. And our Westminster system is particularly clever in that it's designed to mimic the evolutionary environment. That's what the whole purpose of minor parties are, in which minor parties will gain more and more control if the two major parties start to go off kilter. That's the whole point of their existence. And so our system is clever in that even if our ideology goes off track for a while, we do have the mechanism to return the status quo and liberties depending on which parties pop up and go down. But the problem is that the High Court of both Australia and the UK have been dismantling some of the protections that exist inside our political system to stop this protection of competition from happening. So an example in Australia is that the preferencing system was reformed, and that makes it more difficult for minor parties to gain seats. And which means that we're basically being left with, unless something extraordinary happens, major parties will hold pretty much every seat because they preference each other before they preference another party. Now, that's what we have to watch out for. If we want to maintain our liberties in our system instead of mutating into a bureaucratic collectivist system, we have to ensure that the protections of the system itself are returned and put pressure on politicians to do so, because they pass this stuff without asking anybody.
So just further to that, so you asked what can you do, or what? So Liberty Works started out as a think tank, kind of focused on education, kind of classical liberal, kind of libertarian philosophy. You know what? I just don't feel that talking about things does much anymore. So we're taking legal action, right? Changing the law is what we're going to try and do. And that's going to be our business from now on. Because, it's the law that imposes force and forces people to do things against their will. And if we want to protect our liberties and our rights to, lead our lives the way we want to, or the way we think's best, it's the law that needs to change.
You're living up to your name. Liberty Works.
Well, Time
Is
will
it
tell.
possible to do, would there be a legal case against what Ali's talking about? Like, is there some way you could challenge the preferential voting? Because it's compulsory preferential voting versus optional preferential voting. I noticed.
No, I think what Emma was talking about was the federal Senate ballot reform, whereby where you couldn't delegate your preference flows to the party to direct for you. So it's greatly reformed now. And Peter Madden and Bob Day, Tasmanian and Southwegian, they both challenged the legislation in the High Court and lost.
And the other problem is first past the post was always meant to be the intention of the voting system, which allows the true winner of an area to win. And we lost that a while ago, and that was a pretty big loss for the proper maintenance of political parties in Australia.
The argument was, though, that preferential voting originally was that preferential voting would assist minor parties.
Yes, so but it doesn't. So in all practices, it does not do that, and they knew that when they brought it in. Right.
I don't know. I love if only it was voluntary, entirely voluntary preferential voting and voluntary turning up. I think preferential voting is the best system by far.
Let me counter you on that one, Dave. So what really happens is if you've got two big parties, it doesn't matter if the majority of people voted for the independent candidate, so say they were the best actual person for the job, but the two big parties who were against him, they all preferenced each other, and so therefore the majority of votes in the second or third preferences went to one of the major parties. And so what happens is that almost never does an independent or someone who's unaffiliated with the two major parties who might be preferencing each other actually get to win. And so it really outweighs the will of the people in the seat where they get trapped into this problem. You have to get a massive majority in order to win.
Well, your hypothetical assumes that everybody does what the parties tell them to do, and that's probably not entirely hypothetical, but the reality is that's not a legal power they have, that's a cultural power that they have, and there's nothing compelling voters to follow the party's how to vote cards.
Well, most voting is hard. Most people don't pay much attention. They don't understand.
That's why it should be voluntary, and that's why a key part of my recommendation is that lazy, uninformed, can't be bothered people shouldn't be forced to go along and turn up.
No, I will fight you on that every day of the week, because it's the lazy majority that stop the political fringe from taking power. You want the average Joe because they're less likely to be persuaded by the radical left. Everyone who's gone for voluntary voting has gone further and further left. It's a dangerous trap to fall into.
Okay.
Yep.
That's interesting.
Just a reminder to everyone who's watching, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for joining us with comments. We are broadcasting on 5 channels across Facebook and YouTube tonight. And we definitely need your help to reach as many people as possible. So thank you for the comments, and don't forget to share it. And of course, you can watch this live or on delayed stream tomorrow on the Good Source website. And thank you to the Good Source supporters for helping us to put on a show with studio and guests and lights and internet and everything like that. If you'd like to become a supporter, head to goodsource.news and click on the support button where you can help keep this free. There's no paywalls, but we do need you to contribute to keep this up, of course. Let's talk about your show today, Damian, published this morning on the Good Source. And you had a really, really great conversation there about what's really your expertise, your professional bread and butter, and that is crisis communication.
Yeah, well, it's one of the things that, it's part of the sort of the general communications mix, but it's something that I did specialise in for a long time, and I taught at a university overseas, and so I've read a lot of the research, and the particular research that I was looking at in the show this week was from a professor by the name of Drew Weston from the United States, and this guy's a Democrat. He's a true lefty, and he advises the Democratic Party. And he wrote a book back in 2007 called The Political Brain to popularize some research that he'd done into how the brain actually responds and how people actually think about who they're going to vote for and how they respond to messaging. So they get a bunch of Democrats and stick them in a functional MRI machine and have a look at what the brain activity is doing when they feed them messages they agree with, so Democratic type messages. Then they'd feed them Republican messages and see what happened to the brain, right? Then they'd get a Republican, stick them in, do the same thing. And what they found was that the part of the brain that lights up when people are making decisions or having their values challenged is not the thinking circuits of the brain. It's not the cerebral cortex, the outer layers of the brain. It's the more fundamental, deeper, what we would probably think of in business as emotional intelligence or social intelligence. So it's the parts of the brain that are responsible for that. I'm not a neurosurgeon, so I don't know specifically what the parts are, but that's the kind of finding. So basically, we're making an intuitive gut feeling sort of response when we vote. We're not necessarily focused on issues quite as much as the political wants.
Which is heartbreaking for you and I. We want to appeal to people's intellect.
Well, I actually want to appeal to people's values. And I think that's what this is saying, that we should be going in and talking more at a values level about what really matters to people at their core. Now, you could look at that and say, oh, gee, the thinking circuits of the brain aren't lighting up when people are voting. That's a pretty sad story. But in reality, you know, there are many types of thinking, and we can't, you know, the unconscious biases that we have in thought process that are so frowned on by modern woke HR people are actually quite important. That is your past experience, your knowledge base, and these ideas are formed based on all of your lived experience. And so when you get that gut feeling, that emotional intelligence and that social intelligence, that's coming from somewhere, right? It's a history of lived experience. So I know how to respond when I get a certain visual stimuli, right? So if I see somebody who looks aggressive coming towards me, I react immediately. I don't have to think, gee, I wonder, excuse me, could you answer this 20-question survey about your intentions? You know, this guy looks like he might punch me. I need to get the heck out of here. Now, of course, that has implications for, if you've read Malcolm Gladwell's Blink, books about this stuff, emotional intelligence stuff, very interesting. The research done at Harvard's interesting. But
so how does this apply? What lessons can the West Australian Liberal government, the Queensland LNP government, and the federal Liberal government
take? It's nice of you to use the word government there. That's very generous of you.
Oh, sorry.
I don't think we can even say opposition in Western Australia anymore.
Wishful thinking, I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, that's a kind of different thing. I mean, that's really...
How did they take this knowledge and apply it to a campaign?
Well, they didn't, so that's why they're in the position that they're in. You know, you've got to stand for something. Okay, there's a fundamental principle in Professor Weston's research that basically says people will accept ideas that they don't believe in from a leader who looks as though they are trustworthy and they can take their. I mean, in a democracy, we should never get all our wishes, all our dreams come true, really, right? We should all have to be compromising. That's what a democracy is. So you can't say, well, I love Donald Trump 100%, therefore that's why I voted for Donald Trump. No, a lot of people voted for Donald Trump because they share enough values with him, or more values with him than they shared with Hillary Clinton.
Really didn't like Hillary.
Yeah. So okay, so that's the appropriate way to go about it. You want to be showing people that you stand for something. And at the moment, the point I make in the other side this week is that we don't appear to have anybody really, apart from Andrew, anybody really standing up for liberal democratic values of small government in particular. So who's pushing back against this ever self-feeding and expanding bureaucracy that's creeping into every area of our lives? Who's standing up for liberty and speaking out for liberty when state premiers are handing over the power to medical bureaucrats?
It doesn't seem to be the opposition leaders.
No, that's right. And so unfortunately, we're in a position in Australia where we have a Liberal Party that is not acting as a Liberal Party. It's acting as Labor light, so to speak. And as a result of that, they're not getting elected because they're not differentiating. So basic marketing will tell you that you've got to have a clear value proposition. Like elections are like buying a product, right? It's buying a purchase. If you love Mars bars, right, you're not going to switch and start eating. Sorry, let's use Coke and Pepsi because it's easier. If you'd love Coca-Cola, you're not going to switch to Pepsi unless Pepsi gives you a value proposition and differentiates itself from Coke in some way. It says, you know, this is different. This is how we're different. This is why you should drink Pepsi. but also appeals to you on an emotional level, right? And inspires you. I like Pepsi because it's cooler than Coke or whatever, right? So your messaging has to work on that intellectual, rational level, but it also has to work on the visceral and emotional level and stir people up and get them excited. And there has to be a bit of passion behind it. And we have to stand up and sell those liberal values. And at the moment, the vibe I get from the opposition leaderships in in Labor states, and when we saw it play out with Queensland and West Australia's election, the vibe is like we're ashamed of liberalism.
So
we're ashamed of conservatism. So we've allowed the left wing of Australia, the left-wing media, the Labor Party, the Greens Party, and lobby groups like GetUp to change, and educators in a large sense, to make us feel as though the concepts of conservatism and the concepts of liberalism are bad. And we're running around trying to say, we're not that bad.
That's right.
Right? So we shouldn't be playing on the bad playing field. We should say we should be over here on the good playing field. You play for we're not that good, and we'll play for we're really good.
The attitude
Stand up for yourself.
I've advocated, if they were asking me for the messaging advice, the word I've used was unapologetic. And it's pretty much what you're saying. We're ashamed of being conservative. We're ashamed of being right of centre. And when I say we, I mean the party leadership and speechwriters. And it's like, no, guys, we need to be unapologetic about this. We don't think it's right to follow slavishly the advice of a single mid-level bureaucrat. We think that a liberal kind of culture would say, let's consult broadly, wait appropriately, and make a decision soberly instead of being emotional and hyperventilating about and creating fear. What we're going to say is we're going to trust people with the science instead of just saying trust the science. We're actually going to show them our workings, and we're going to be different. And we need to be unapologetic was the word.
Exactly. And what Professor Weston says is if you do that, right, the message you send non-verbally is that you're strong, you're a good leader, you're genuine, you're authentic, you stand up for your principles, you stick to your principles. And then people will actually respond very positively to you, according to his research. So it's quite liberating. And that's how Trump did it, right? Because he just said, I don't care what the left says. And instead of saying, oh, we've got to worry about what the media are going to think, he stands up and says, I don't care what the media say. You know, I'm here as a representative of the people, and this is what the people have elected. This is the basis upon which the people have elected us. I personally think the Liberal Party is having its last hurrah federally, that we scraped over the line thanks to ScoMo's excellent work. And he does have a certain degree of marketing nous around centralising messaging and getting control of that message landscape. They did a very, very good job in 2019.
Did Shorten conversely fail in messaging?
He did. He was a bad, you know, not a great champion of much. And we got over the line. But we got over the line with one arm tied behind our back because the entire culture is so left-wing, really. And that's the big shock, I think, for a lot of expats who come back who are not left-wing when they come back and they go, whoa, what happened to the old Aussie spirit of, you know, personal responsibility, sticking it to authority, all that stuff. It just seems to have dwindled.
Andrew, do you think federal government is on its last hurrah, as Damian put it?
Well, I mean, my view is I think both the main political parties have been suffering a crisis of relevance and belief in themselves for a long time. So if you take the Labor Party, I mean, well, you talk about values and feelings and
they've got the same problem.
They got the same problem. Like, you know, if you sliced and diced it, you know, just simplistically, if you're a small business person or someone with aspirational values, you voted Liberal Party. If you're a working class man that you know, just wanted a fair go, you'd vote Labor. And then the Greens come along, you know, and the Greens have got to me, the best value-based proposition out of all the parties. In that, if you want to save the world, I just drop my little vote in the ballot box and I walk away with an elevated sense of self-righteousness because I've
moral superiority
because, you know, I've supported saving the world, right? So, you know, and I think Labor Party have lost their base, and I think the Liberal Party, I mean, Howard recognised that the Labor Party were losing their base, and brought in that Howard Battlers, you know, the tradies and that traditionally used to vote Labor. He brought them along. But now the Liberal Party have given them up too, and they're being seduced strangely, for some strange reason. They're just seduced by some of the more trendy, fashionable, woke, you know, narratives that are running around the globe at the moment. And I think they're both in a lot of trouble, to be perfectly honest.
Absolutely. And I would say what you said about the Greens is absolutely right. And so we've got the barking mad party, the raving loony left party, saying we're a values-based party and getting 10% of the Australian vote, including votes of Conservatives. Anybody who's up against a Green at the moment will tell you that there's a phenomenon of, and it is, I'm afraid to say, Ellie, typically a female phenomenon, but women over 40 years of age who are quite wealthy and have made their wealth on the back of liberal free market values and the capitalism of our system, and you know the opportunities that gives them, rocking up in their SUVs at polling booths, and then popping over to the Green candidate, getting the how to vote card, going in and ticking Green number one, because it's a sense of virtue signaling and a sense of, you know, I get a little kick out of that. Sorry, Ellie, 10 bits.
Mao, Stalin, Trotsky, Mussolini, Hitler, all blokes, if I am correct in stating that. So don't come at me with this "it's a woman problem" thing. But I was going to say that the only philosophical works that politicians need to read are the writings of Machiavelli, because of anyone in history, he is the one who really understood not only how to structure good governance and small government, because that is fundamentally what he actually believed in, but also how people vote and how they respond to leaders. And his lessons are as accurate today as they were when they were written. And if politicians understood what he had written, they would know how to run a campaign and how to win elections properly, and also how to gauge what geopolitics is doing, because I just fear that we are living in a world of politicians who are just ignorant of not only history and politics, but also how human beings operate and how societies operate. They don't seem to understand what the unintended consequences of their policies are, and how to. It's just everything's wrong from that political spectrum. They're so far down the list of models that they don't even make it on the first rung, if you know what I mean.
Well, let's hope that Albanese is just a little bit less irrelevant than ScoMo come next federal election time, for the sake of us all and children.
That was a mistake. They came after tradies' youth for the E thing, you know, the E cars, and that's what killed it for Labor at the last election.
Yep. Naughty Design says it's true. Women vote for safety, meaning tyranny. Well, that's it. Women, give your vote to your husband.
Oh, jeez.
There goes half the audience.
There's the broad church for that.
Ali, I'm in the middle there.
No, I'm
Look, I'm scared that all three of you put together, so I'm not worried.
Yes, exactly.
Well, let's move on to a safer topic. George Floyd.
Something we all agree on, not.
That's it. Banned off YouTube, removed from Facebook. It was nice being here tonight, guys.
No, we're not going to talk about the what was it, the article that Facebook most recently banned from? Was it the Daily Mail?
Oh, did they ban it? With the video, the Daily Mail had the video.
I'm sorry,
the actual video.
I've got a mental blank.
It was the body cam video on the Daily Mail.
No, totally different topic. It was one story that was, I can't remember. Anyway, George Floyd. Damian, your thoughts, the verdict.
Look, it's a sad and tragic situation. I've watched both videos, the body cam one in full, which was disturbing, and the other one, the street compilation of
They're hard to watch.
Videos. Oh, very hard to watch. Look, you talk to most police, they'll tell you this was awful policing. and there are systems and processes for dealing with arrests in this sort of environment. You don't put your knee on somebody's neck, and you certainly don't leave it there for 9 minutes when you've got people screaming at you to take it off, and the person saying, "I can't breathe," and
unresponsive for the last few minutes.
But murder, no, I don't think so. I think there has to be a degree of, well, I don't know what the American breakdown is at first, second, third, but there has to be a degree of intent. There wasn't, obviously, I don't believe any intent to kill. I believe it's got nothing to do with racism whatsoever.
Yeah,
on the contrary.
No evidence at all of racism.
No, they usually.
I believe second-degree murder requires intent, and third-degree murder requires an act of recklessness that is indiscriminate. For example, throwing a brick off a motorway overpass or shooting into a crowd.
Right, so that's more than manslaughter. Yeah.
Well, no, that's manslaughter is different again.
Oh.
Manslaughter is recklessness occasioning death.
Yes.
I think what the third-degree murder is called is the test of a depraved heart. That you weren't just being reckless, you're actually being depraved. But arbitrarily, not focused on anybody.
Okay.
And so the second, neither the second nor the third was proved. But I think manslaughter was a makeable case.
Yeah, probably. But I think in the case of police officers under duress, maybe we should look at some sort of, there should be some leniency because of the extreme pressure that they're working under. And we're asking these guys to go out and protect us and to act as our protectors to a certain extent. Well, I'm very conscious of, I'm a civil libertarian, so I'm very conscious of, abuses of police power, I've got to tell you. And I grew up in the 80s.
Especially in the last 12 months.
Right. And I grew up in, yes, exactly. The Dan Andrews government and the Joe Bjelke-Peterson government were alike in this way in terms of use of police or abuse of police power. So all governments of all political persuasions are potentially are capable of using this.
Sure.
So, in that sense, I'm a little concerned. But I also know a lot of fantastic police officers, and I don't think I'd want to be a police. I'd be handing in my badge.
I only know fantastic.
Yeah, actually, I've never met a bad one. But I'm sure they're out there.
I lie. There was one guy, but that's probably a story for another time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do know somebody who is just a jacked up little self-important guy, and I knew officers who knew him at work, and apparently he was the same as when he interacted with me. Just this arrogant, short man that threw his weight around like he was 7 foot tall. And
yeah, you get those anyway.
So I've met one in my whole life.
But you get, with the Floyd situation, if you look at the video, and I've only looked at the video, you're a bit more researched. We had a little discussion about this over dinner, but you're a little bit more researched on the details of his background. But there
were multiple, I think at least 12, maybe high teens of complaints against him. Multiple occasions where Derek Chauvin had been reported for excessive force.
Oh, Chauvin, yes. Yeah. Floyd, I'm talking about Floyd, though.
Floyd was a very criminal.
I mean, I can only look at...
He'd done 9 stints in jail.
Right. Oh, you've got a rogue copy who probably should have been reined in a lot sooner. But he needs to go down for something related to, nearly manslaughter or negligent, he didn't do his duty in terms of duty of care. There wasn't so again, I don't know American law, but whatever that would be applicable. But certainly murder, 40 years. I think that sends a very poor message to young police officers who are, yes, he's yet to be sentenced. 8 weeks it'll be. Those bureaucrats move fast, don't they? So where that's my position on that. In terms of Floyd and his behaviour, if you look at the video, he was off his head. To be polite, if I was being rude about it, and if he wasn't off his head, then he was behaving like a complete, so-and-so. And I wouldn't want to have had dealt with a guy that big, who was not being cooperative in the least.
Yeah.
He kept saying, "Hey, man, I'm okay. I'm not a good guy. I'm a good guy." But he didn't do one thing they asked him to do. He resisted every step of the way.
Yeah. He had enough fentanyl in his system to kill a horse. There was another drug there as well. He was arrested. The police turned up when he was in the car with his drug dealer.
God,
and I haven't heard this recently, but I heard back at the time that he also had COVID in the results. So
I thought I heard him saying, "I've got COVID, man. I've got COVID." Came out in one of the body cam tapes. Yeah, there's something to that effect. But
yeah.
Anyway,
Ellie Melly, let's bring you in. Did Joe Biden and Maxine Waters, I think was her name, representative, Congresswoman, give the Chauvin defense team grounds for an appeal?
Look, I'm going to be completely honest about this. I have missed most of the recent developments because I was moving house. But what I will say is that I hate discussing Floyd because it's not an isolated incident that you can easily pick apart. It's actually embedded in 6 or 7 complicated social and political conversations that are going on at the same time. And Maxine Waters and what she went and said to Canberra, basically inciting violence to manipulate a court outcome, is just part of the conversation about Floyd, which is, it's not about a criminal who, let's face it, basically overdosed, resisted arrest, and got himself into a world of trouble. It's about how this overall collectivist Marxist Black Lives Matter movement has teamed up with the democratic side of politics to corrupt the court, to corrupt the political system, to corrupt the press, and to ultimately gain power over what should be blind justice, but is now becoming social justice. So I didn't see all of what she did, but I definitely think there was grounds for appeal. And not just that, it's very clear that there was no fair trial. It's reached the point where the press went so hard on it, and the social justice movements went so out of control on the whole narrative that it would be impossible for anybody to have a fair trial in that atmosphere.
I think Candace Owens said, we're in a position of absolute mob rule now. This is just outrageous, the way that the court was influenced by these political statements, and it's a separate issue, right?
Look, the most disappointed people with the verdict was the left.
Yeah,
because the verdict showed that justice in this instance, even according to them, was blind. Yeah. Now, we might hold concerns that maybe that mob rule influenced the court. For me personally, I don't understand the American differentiation between, murder and murder 2, murder 3 and whatnot. But certainly in an Australian sense, that would be at least a manslaughter charge. I've got no problem with that. And
agreed.
And so, in a sense, the legal system worked as it should have worked, and the left are upset about it.
Yeah, because they can't do their rights.
They can't do what they want to do.
You're quite right, Andrew. Sorry, I didn't think of it till just now. The left really were begging for a fight on this one. They wanted to go back out and start looting and burning and, visiting Nike stores. They wanted that. They love the theatre of this angry politics because it means they don't have to do any hard work. They don't have to think about anything. They can get what they want by frightening other people into doing what they say.
Yep. Well, they haven't wasted any time because another white cop has been involved in a shooting and fatality.
Terrible.
where they had been called to intervene, and the photos that I was tweeting today was of this very heavy 15-year-old black girl with a knife lunging, and the black girl that she was aiming at was gone for. And the cop on the scene saved the victim, the target's life by stopping that attack in his tracks. LeBron James in her tracks. Sorry, LeBron James comes out and shows a photo of the police officer and says, "You're next," with an hourglass emoji, as if to say, time is running out for you.
Oh, I missed that. Gee whiz, that's...
Oh, yeah. He deleted the tweet 2 hours later. And
because Twitter would have taken it down straight away. I'm sure.
I know I reported it, and maybe a million other people. But he retweeted something else later. Well, not retweeted, but tweeted something else again later, not apologising, and basically saying, I'm upset and everybody should be upset. But, Damned if you do, damned if you don't. If the cop hadn't have intervened, a black girl would have died. If the cop did intervene, a black girl died.
But you don't want to blow this up too much, right? LeBron James is not the spokesperson of anything, right?
No, he's
so
just...
media will blow everything up.
He's just a token of the fact that the whole Black Lives Matter movement, the whole grievance protest industry hasn't taken the good news of getting a conviction in one shooting where justice went through the system and they got the result they wanted. Same thing again. They're like, oh, it didn't work. We should have convicted all cops.
Well, I don't accept that he represents everyone. You know. Well,
he doesn't.
You know, he took the tweet down. I can't speak for him. I've only got a cursory understanding of the actual events as they occurred, but I understand it's as you described. There's no doubt that there's heightened tensions and there's problems in race in America. There's no doubt in my mind. Now, where the blame lies and whatnot, but there's heightened tensions that I think we struggle to understand in a country like Australia. And I don't think we should be, you know, we should read too much into idiots putting stupid things up on Twitter. He's a very famous idiot, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, I just be a little bit concerned that we shouldn't in ourselves be blowing this up out of proportion as well.
Well, the problem is it's not just LeBron James, it's the whole grievance industry over there. They're doing the same thing as they did with George Floyd and saying, all right, now this cop has to, you know, justice is what we say it will be, not an actual assessment soberly of the facts of the case.
It's the playbook rolling out again, you know, just jump on whatever the hot issue is of the day and attach your, you know, call it a systemic problem and then attach.
I mean, I find myself 95% in agreement with you, but I'll quibble on the 5%. So we're here talking and saying LeBron James didn't understand the facts and shouldn't have made the comments he made. And we're sitting here doing exactly the same thing.
Yeah, sure.
I just think we just got to, you know.
Free speech. No. Free speech to screw up.
My criticism.
I screw up regularly, so, you know.
My criticism of LeBron James and all people saying the same thing as him isn't that he didn't understand the facts. It's that he didn't care about the facts. So we're not the same because we actually care about the facts. The 20%, the 80%, the 100%, the more we have, the more we're willing to change our mind. But what is in evidence is that people like LeBron James are not. They've got a foregone conclusion, a preferred outcome, and nothing except that will make them happy.
Well, we'll just let you, sorry, Ali, you go ahead.
Oh, it's just before we move on to another topic, I was going to say we have to be really careful about underestimating the role of social media in places like Twitter have in our current society, because Twitter and other social media activities are actually a parallel to the old publications and printed documents that were going on in the last Marxist revolutions and socialist revolutions. And so what is said on these platforms is magnified by not people like you and me, but by the politicians and the press, who then write them into the general social narrative. And as the New York Times said, Twitter is writing their headlines. And so we have to watch what is said on these platforms and take it quite seriously. When people who have influence start saying things like this, they should be openly criticized and publicly told not to do that, because their rhetoric gets translated into a larger social movement. And don't forget, it was the ex-CEO of Twitter who a couple of years ago talked about putting conservatives up against the wall and filming them being shot. And this is stuff that you don't think we'd ever see in this century, but it's here. And I think Dave's quite right to point out that it's happening and we should be watching it.
So I just want to share this this tweet from an account. I guess her name is Bree Newsom. That's a Twitter handle, but she's changed her title to Defund and Abolish Police, Refund Our Communities. And she has 467,000 followers. So what she's tweeted today is that teenagers have been having fights, including fights involving knives, for eons. Guess she went to a different high school than me. We do not need police to address these situations by showing up to the scene and using a weapon against one of the teenagers. You all need help, and I mean that sincerely.
Well, I went to an all-girls school, unlike you boys, and I can assure you that we were not knifing each other in lunch break. It was not a thing. I think the worst thing that happened to me was a lock a door on my face, which got immediately returned. So it's not a normal behaviour, and if it's a normal behaviour in that school, then that society needs to have a much closer look at the way it's behaving.
473,000, did you say?
Followers? No, the followers. That was her followers.
Right, well, that's disturbing enough, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it does worry me. Look, and this is the problem, right? Because here we are, as Andrew says, here we are saying they ought to not say that on Twitter because that's going to influence, you know, and that's exactly what we would say when they say that about us. So, you know, how do we, you know, I guess you got to sort of say, well, let's have the debate rather than saying I want LeBron James to take that down. Let's say I want LeBron James to wake up to himself.
Yeah, that wasn't that with me, and I didn't fully finish my point, and I should have, which was that if we want to like properly treat social media as it should be, conservatives need to be on it and need to be counteracting these narratives and having the debate, as you say, in public. Otherwise, it is going to be a one-sided societal shift.
Which is my bugbear, right? We don't speak up. We're the quiet Australian phenomenon. Andrew, you'd have a view on that, right? It's been around for a while.
I'm much less vocal than I used to be be perfectly honest. And
I feel like crawling under a rock myself.
I think there's a danger. Like Ali's got a view on this. I'm probably not quite as excited by all this because I think when people are yelling too much, it just becomes background noise. And so I think over the journey, this will gradually, you know, society will come to grips with all this social media stuff. Things will settle down, and new equilibriums will be found. This has all been rushed at societies around the world. And I guess we're all coming to terms with what's it. Like I just know myself, you know, I used to be on Twitter. I'm not on Twitter anymore because it just drives me insane. And maybe I should be. Maybe I should be fighting the good fight. And
I think you're doing well enough where you are.
And baiting. But you know, I look at these things like these court cases. I just think let the law run its course. There's no point in us even talking about it. Really, it's not. We could talk about LeBron maybe or whatever.
Well,
but,
I mean, LeBron's just a symptom. He's not a problem. Like you basically said, he's irrelevant to everybody who's thinking, and he's a lionized hero to everybody who is saying what they think. The problem where you can't just let these court cases run themselves is where what we saw in the Derek Chauvin trial was that you had people like Maxine Waters, representative congresswoman, out there on the streets inciting violence, inciting insurrection, telling people to go out and protest and stay on the streets and riot and do all the things that Black Lives Matter Corporation does and did all of last year if they don't get the verdict they want. The jury was watching that. The jury was accessible to all of the media. You have the president of the nation putting his thumb on the scales of justice, telling people that we're praying for the right outcome.
He did that after the jury was sequestered, though.
They weren't sequestered, ever. After they recessed, maybe, but they weren't sequestered. They were watching that. They had access to the media at the whole time. And this is maybe not in the jury room. I'm not saying they saw that particularly. I don't know. But and this is the problem, is that we can't abdicate these battlegrounds because they're important, and the justice system doesn't deliver justice often enough. It's fair and it's right to be concerned about those outcomes.
But what do you want? What do you want to do?
Well, maintain the pressure. At least leave exactly the same pressure that we have. I mean, well, for example, we're doing what I want to do.
Yep.
Let's beat them on the ground they're at. Let's bring attention to, for example, the legal battles that you're bringing. It's not good enough to leave you in the courtroom by yourself. We need to get popular sentiment behind you, political sentiment. Like if you're federal,
that's exactly what BLM is saying.
Well, we're certainly not bringing down any streets, burning down any streets. But if the federal court challenge fails, then we need the sentiment to pressure the politicians to say create better laws. Maybe they should have been struck down, but if they're not, well, we want you to make better laws the old-fashioned way.
Yeah, right. So we're not rioting in the streets and burning things down. We're putting the pressure in the appropriate way.
Not rioting in the streets.
Through the political system, which should be the ultimate.
And it's extremely inappropriate for politicians to be commenting on those sort of current court matters. And I doubt whether you would see that so much in Australia. I know the Pellowe series of cases were, you know, politically charged as much as you would ever see.
It's pretty common. Trial by media is pretty common. I mean, it's been happening since Lindy Chamberlain.
Well, Victoria is a special state, right? There's just something there's something rotten in Victoria, and I think the zealousness of which they approached the lockdown by the police shows that there's a slightly different culture in the police force as there is down there. There is in other states.
Yeah.
I don't think you would see that. Certainly, the judiciary have a very left-wing bent down there, and it makes sense because the judiciary being appointed there one after the other over a 20-25 year period by pretty hard left administrations. So you know, I think as a conservative, you don't want to end up in court in Victoria. That's for sure.
You need to. And when I told Dan Andrews and Lisa Neville, Police Minister, to come and get me, I expected it to go badly in Victoria and have to go much higher.
Yeah.
Eventually, because that is inevitable. You don't want to be in trouble there if you're a conservative.
No way.
Ellie, were you trying to jump in with something then?
Yeah, it's a little bit behind now, but I was going to say, let's not forget that social media is not a new phenomenon. It's actually an expression of typical human behavior in which we discuss and become politically agitated by whatever mechanism we have at our hands. So in the past, it might have been flyers or discussions or rallies or talks. Social media is merely the new form of our ability to discuss things openly in a public forum. And we are social creatures. So the only way to close the Pandora's box on social media would be to go down a China path, which we start banning and heavily censoring our social media, which I don't think is a great approach to take. It's better that we let humans get used to global conversation. And of course, it's going to be a bit of a rough trap because human beings and cultures don't have shared values. And so we are going to have a bit of a global fight about what we think is right and wrong. And the beauty of social media is that is where we are seeing the biggest questions and discussions on human social evolution in history. And it's so easy to write it off as something superficial when really the biggest political decisions of our entire history as a species are going to happen via social media.
And it's not a bad thing if it's if it's liberal and it's let to run its course and be free. Then the algorithms should, well, if there are less algorithms, it would naturally.
I've always tried to campaign to our conservative leaders that we have to, if they're going to legislate anything, it's not the speech or the content. It has to be the making sure the platform is an open forum, a true, free and fair place to discuss ideas. And that is what they should be trying to mandate, not censoring speech, because that only gives Silicon Valley a political power.
Yeah.
One of the cases that's going on in Victoria at the moment is the Zoe Buller case, the lady who was arrested while pregnant for having the wrong opinion on Facebook. Yeah, so we actually did a fundraiser for Zoe. And this goes to some of the good things about social media, because it's very, you know, for people like us, because it's very easy to just see the bad. But Zoe Buller, if some of you might recall, she was a pregnant woman that wanted to attend a protest march against the COVID lockdowns that were occurring in Victoria. She did some Facebook posts. Next thing you know, the police knock on her door without warrant, enter, arrest her, handcuff her. Luckily, her partner had the good sense to do a Facebook Live, not record it, but do a Facebook Live, and went live to Facebook with what was going on, and this generated an enormous amount of support, and just showed just how sort of power crazy the police are down there, and the legal system are down there. And so on the back of that we found it quite easy to raise funds for her to fight her legal battle. Now she's facing a criminal charge of incitement.
I can't believe that they haven't just gone, no,
she's facing it, criminal charge. So it's ongoing. It looks like it's going to be, they're delaying it until November by the look of it. Just spoke to the lawyers today. It's
an awful burden for a young woman to have over her head.
She's just had her baby.
She's just had her baby.
Congratulations, Zoe.
Yeah, and so
congratulations, Zoe, and congratulations to all the bureaucrats in Victoria for your fine social justice work there.
Sincere first time, sarcastic second.
Yes, that's correct.
But in this legislation, what it means is that they can take every electronic device in the house. So they stripped her of all the computers, the phone the partner was recording on. They took that off him, right? So there would have been no record. So social media delivered that video live, so everyone could see the true, ridiculousness of what these police were doing to this woman.
How tyrannical.
Yeah. So
we get to this point.
The reason that politicians are so desperate to control social media with policies because it is the most powerful tool that citizens have to ensure that they maintain their freedoms. Because, as Andrew has said, it is only by publicising what's happening to individuals that people are able to maintain some kind of control over their governments.
Yeah. Answer your question, how did we get to this? Great word Dr. John Humphreys shared with me. Safetyism. It's this love of safety, even at the cost of liberty.
Yeah.
Safetyism. It's the highest good in some voters' minds, which is such a conceit. It's such a lie.
China does it
Safety
too.
is not the highest good.
They're constantly on about maintaining respectable order, and it's very deep into Chinese culture. And so the way they deal with any political opposition is they say, look at the rabble, look at how disordered they are. We need to bring back calm and order. And they'll say to the West, you have no right to interfere in our domestic activities and policies and concerns in the most ridiculous circumstances when people are just simply criticising China's compliance on trade or anything, never mind the domestic human rights abuses. So it's that constant. Let's just be nice and keep the peace and not rock the boat and be polite. And you were out of line for losing your temper then, or you shouldn't have done this or that. Or, nor do you. That's very paternalistic kind of totalitarian, authoritarian government speak. So I'm not saying we should be throwing, food at each other all the time when we're having political debates. There needs to be a degree of respectability, but we also have to accept and give voice and airtime to contradictory opinions. And I can't believe that in Australia in 2021 we're seeing a young woman being charged with a crime that is nothing but a thought crime.
Yeah,
there's nothing tangible to this crime.
Yeah.
Well,
she's too powerless. She's not Donald Trump, and even Donald Trump wasn't inciting. But anyway, that's another story. Ali, sorry,
that's true.
A continuous level of a small amount of chaos actually prevents larger harm, and whereas totalitarian governments disguise great harm with a semblance of peace, and that always holds true in every civilization and every political structure.
Yep.
But we don't want too much, you don't want a lot of conflict. We don't want BLM doing what they're doing in America and blowing things up. And, there has to be a degree of law and order.
I think
getting that balance.
I think small, not localized terrorism. Slightly different.
Yes, correct. Okay, we're clear on that. That's good.
Yeah.
There's a limit to my libertarianism.
Well, I reckon we should wrap it up. Which camera? This one. Ellie, forgot your name for a second. I was going to call you Zoe.
Oh,
but,
I got two, so I've managed to confuse all of you boys tonight. I get variations on the theme. It's great.
Ellie, final thoughts for the evening.
Oh, just that it's really scary what we're watching, particularly in American politics, play out, and I just hope that it isn't imported into Australia.
Yeah, good luck with that. I think we're...
Yeah, I mean, I don't have much hope because the only thing that might save us is that our politicians aren't capable of copy and pasting. That's about the only thing that I have faith in.
It didn't take us long to import Black Lives Matter. That was, yeah, very, very quick. I think we used to be 20 years behind America, and now I think it's 20 hours, care of social media, globalization. And that's probably only because we're actually a few hours ahead of them. But we'll find
we're first in the time zone. We should be setting the pace for the rest of the world. We got
we
totally
should
ripped
be.
off.
Yeah, we should be.
No burning, no looting, but a lot more talking is my final thought. We need to get out there as liberals, libertarians and conservatives and push, make our voices heard, and counter the very obvious playbook of the left that they use on every single thing.
Who even knows somebody who behaves like that? I don't, but
I do. All of my friends.
That's horrific. Well, ask them, please stop the rioting, burning and looting.
I'm from that generation, and they all grew up as, liberals on the North Shore, and they've all gone full BLM Antifa style. It's terrible.
Wow. Andrew, your final thoughts for the night. Thank you very much for coming. And website for Liberty Works is on the screen right now. Make sure you get along there, get on their mailing list, and donate to the worthy fights that they're fighting on our behalf there, and tell all your friends.
Thanks, Dave. Final thoughts. Every time you regulate, you take away somebody's freedom. So every time a new piece of regulation is proposed by, governments, or we got to think very carefully about whose freedoms we're actually taking away. And you can bet your bottom dollar there'll be unintended consequences, and there'll be freedom snatched from people that don't deserve them, have taken away from them.
Yeah. And that actually is the biggest social change I think I've seen coming back to Australia, is that it's like, please fix everything for me, government.
Right.
Whereas once upon a time we were much more independent. Now we want the government to fix it. So keep an eye out when you're reading the news and having a think about things. Should the government do something about this? Maybe the government should do nothing about this. Maybe there's nothing the government can do about this.
Right.
We've gone from helicopter parents to a helicopter stage.
Yeah,
that's right.
That's what it is.
Yeah, totally. Interesting comment there. I'll just wrap up by saying, let's not rely on government to provide safety for us, because every time we increase, in fact, what you both said together, an increase of safety, increase of regulation, increase of public health directives is an ever-reducing attack, ever-increasing attack on liberty, ever-reducing our liberty. And liberty is far more important than safety. But that's it from Not Q&A tonight, where we are the alternative to every other mainstream media voice that you're going to hear. I think I just gave ourselves a promotion to mainstream media.
Right.
Not there, but anyway. Thank you, everyone, for watching, tuning in, sharing, subscribing, and supporting. And we will see you next week, 7:30 Australian Eastern Standard Time, Thursday night. Good night.
Good night.